Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. We have a quorum and we're ready to begin. The first thing is to ask if there's any regrets from councilors, Madam Clerk?
We have no regrets this evening.
Thank you. Council, are there any conflicts of interest to declare? Madam Clerk, we had no notice of any and I see none, so there are none tonight. Council, would two of you like to move and second resolving into a committee of the whole? Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Lischina. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and so we are resolved now into committee of the whole. Council, I would like to ask if there is a mover and seconder for consent items 1 and 2 and discussion item 5 and item number 6, the Heritage Oakville minutes and permit. Councillor Duddick is moving. Thank you.
Your Worship,
Yes.
Your Worship, there's a gentleman who wanted to delegate for item number 2 on the consent agenda, and I don't know if he's joined us or not. So
He has joined us? Well, in that case, let's put him on.
So I am calling Jim Knowlton as a delegation to item number 2.
Mr. Knowlton, welcome. Council looks
Thank you.
forward to your information.
Thank you very much. Shall I begin?
Go ahead, sir.
Greetings. This is new technology for me. Help me with getting my bearings. Can you all hear me?
We hear you fine, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Very good. Then I shall begin. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and members of council and staff for this opportunity to speak with you today. When my wife Buffy and I started this process almost 4 years ago of building a new home, I didn't think I would be addressing you today, certainly not in this manner, but the challenges we face have been real, and I thought, particularly because we've just come through the process of getting our building permit and started construction not long ago, that this was an opportunity to share some of that experience with you. My aim is to show you some of what our experience has been like and offer some suggestions for positive ways to improve the town's process of improving development projects like ours. Given your responsibilities as town councilors, I know that you're familiar with the process of getting a building permit and have seen many people like me, like us, who have been working with the town to obtain one. I'm guessing that few of you have had the opportunity to experience the process firsthand from end to end as a client. It's the client view of the process that I would like to show you now. I'm hopeful that you'll be able to benefit from my experience and better serve the town's interests and the interests of others like my wife and I who chose to do this small residential development project. So that my story might be more than just a boring and unhappy complaint, I'm asking that the town reimburse my wife and I for development charges fees that we've already paid to the town. Creating this stake in this matter brings focus to this discussion, and I ask that you judge at the conclusion of these proceedings if you believe that the process of getting a building permit for our project took too long and cost too much. If you agree with me that it took too long and it cost too much, then I ask you to work with me at the conclusion of these proceedings to reduce our development charges accordingly. Let me explain who I am and the background that I bring to the discussion of this issue. I'm a teacher and I'm a performance consultant by profession. I have a Bachelor of Arts from University of Toronto, a Bachelor of Education from Queen's University, a Master's in Public Administration from Queen's University School of Local Government. I have an AMCT designation from the Association of Municipal Clerks and Treasurers of Ontario, and I have a Project Management Professional designation from the Project Management Institute in the United States. I taught in the Toronto School Board. I wrote policy for the region of Hamilton-Wentworth. I spent 10 years working at Canadian Pacific Rail, implementing IT systems, and I've worked 25 years consulting in human performance improvement at Benchmark Performance Inc. and Luminance Inc. Clients that I've worked for include many Fortune 100 companies that you would recognize, like Bank of Montreal, Harris Bank, Royal Bank, CIBC, HSBC, Ontario Hydro, Ontario Power Generation, both Canadian railroads, Rogers Communications, Suncor, Kraft, Unilever. I've worked with all three levels of government, most specifically Environment Canada, Correctional Services, both federally and provincially, Ministry of Education, District of Muskoka, many others. I spent most of the last 40 years working with clients to respond to changes in their environment. I've worked with them to design and implement new programs and to effectively manage their need to respond to those changes in their environment. I have a lot of experience and a lot of experience with this kind of thing in a lot of different organizations. And I bring all of it to viewing the process of what has happened with us during the period of time when we have been working to obtain a building permit for our project. As someone who's taught project management skills in most of the organizations that I've just mentioned, when I first met with John, our architect, I asked, regarding the process with the town, how long will it take probably, and how much will it cost? He said, I can't tell you that. I said, really? You've done this business in Oakville for 25 years and you can't tell me roughly how long it will take and how much it will cost? He said, no. The town makes it very difficult to plan project time and cost for this with any degree of accuracy. So we've just stopped trying to do it altogether. Now I want to stop here just for the moment. If I could, I would ask all of you, have you heard this before? And I would love to take just a moment and just ask with the people who are assembled here if this is completely new to you or if you have heard it before. And I'll pause for just a moment.
And I'm not sure that everybody can hear you either. Councillor Chinna, are you complaining about not being able to hear? Madam Clerk,
I
stop
couldn't
the
hear
clock.
you, Mr. Mayor.
Can you hear me now? All right. Well, I hope everybody's heard me. Mr. Knowlton, I stopped the clock, and I'm not going to start it again for a few seconds, but I sense that you may not have been aware that you have a 10-minute guidance on your presentation here.
I was aware, and I was actually keen to even use part of that 10 minutes for this purpose. It is challenging to simply do this as a presentation without getting any feedback, and I've wondered, particularly at this point before I go further, if in fact what I'm saying is completely new to people or if in fact it's commonly understood and accepted.
We're very familiar with the way individual projects can surface unexpected events and conditions that will make it hard to forecast how long a process will take. And we had a report commissioned, which is before us, and I assume you have it as well, that lays out some of the exigencies that arose in your project, which includes COVID. So please feel welcome to continue.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. That's the feedback's helpful to me. If I was to carry on, and I'll work on the basis of saying that this is something that people are familiar with, then I'll proceed and say that I've worked with John's staff around creating a process chart that details the timelines and the costs associated with getting a building permit for our project. These would be all the things that would be required, not related to construction, but to get ready for construction. So it's all the stuff that, in a sense, involves the town in getting approvals. We created the initial draft in 2018, and I've updated the document at regular intervals since that time as new information became available. The document that I provided to you through the town is the most recent version of that chart. What I'd like to do is review it with you now, and I hope you all have access to it. Am I correct in that assumption?
Mr. Knowlton, you should get on with it.
Fine. If you've had a chance to review that document, and I assume you have, Then you note that there are main sections, that there are higher level tasks, and there are 7 of them in total. There are individual tasks within each section, and there are timelines and costs that correspond to each. I don't know if you have seen similar tools to this before, but this is an aim to try and present or view the process of getting review and getting approval at the town for a building permit. And what it does is it tells us the total cost and the timelines for all the tasks. The gist of it is that the actual costs and the timelines for our project, just this portion of it, is 3 years, 7 months, and 5 days. $725,000 is the cost. This is in no way close to what Brandon, who I believe did the preparation, or at least the staff report that you have in front of you, says. It's understated the time required to prepare or to complete the process by roughly 1.5 years, and the cost is understated by $665,000. I just heard a ding. Does that mean anything specifically to you? Am I out of time?
We don't know what that was, but we're still listening.
Fine, then I'll proceed. What I would like to point out further with all of this is the process of working through these issues with the town helped me to see a number of things as I worked with you. So as I have my performance consultant hat on, these things became evident to me. Time delays and related costs were substantially impacted by poor performance of staff at the town and the way that town carried out its responsibilities. I see poor process design in the way that you do what you do. There are unclear lines of authority and disconnects between authority and responsibility for the various roles within your system. There are poor lines of communications, lack of transparency between the department and with the public. There's a lack of organizational discipline in following your own processes. And there's an inability to hold individuals accountable within your system for the actions within the system. Behaviors that are process-bound, not focused on outcomes, and not responsive to the needs of the public. Leadership models, or your leadership models, reward bad behaviors while refusing to confront non-performance of staff. All of these things I provided in details in supporting documents that I provided to you, but I won't go through them now. The point that I would make is that all of this has caused this to be a very, very lengthy process. And I would do in some detail with people who would like to do that. I would love to go through the details of this, but 10 minutes here and now won't serve to cover that. What I would ask is this, that the issue at stake, I think, really, and I believe in your good intentions in trying to support development that is cost effective and that produces a housing stock that is affordable within this community. I believe that this council and this committee of council really believe that small development projects like ours produce these kind of community results. They lower the cost of purchasing homes. They increase the supply of residential real estate. They provide for greater variety of residential real estate options for people. And perhaps most importantly, they provide for intensification of use of existing developed areas and better utilization of existing infrastructure. Truly, if you want these outcomes, then it can only happen if the town can work more effectively with small developers like my wife and I, and to reduce the time and the cost of approving small development projects. I thank you for your time in attending to me today. I would like to thank Kathy Duddick most specifically for all of her help and her guidance with me around all of it, because she has been the human face quite often in a process that's been altogether challenging and quite often unfriendly. And I am grateful to her for her part in helping me through this process. I put it back to you, and I would welcome in the time remaining to answer any of the questions that you have for me around this matter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knowlton, for your information. Are there questions for the gentleman? Councillor Duddick?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Jim, very much for taking the time to, as you say, sort of flash on the process that many of us have heard frustration with for varying reasons. I guess the one thing when I was talking with you about various things that I don't want to say had stalled the process, but my understanding was with a pre-consultation at the onset of a process, they identify things that may have to be drilled down to, whether it's a different kind of application you should be submitting or that sort of thing. Did you find there were things outside of the pre-consultation that you had an issue with?
Yeah, I know that we had talked about this one specific example. The idea of the pre-consultation process, I think, is an excellent one. And just to hit it briefly, what it does is it asks people like us who have a development project plan to submit it to the town, let the town review it, and give us some preliminary responses, or at least some type of way of getting a professional's response at the town to what we're doing. So we have something that's formative rather than a summative piece all at the end. There was a particular component that we were surprised at much later in the process, and it was that there is no provision for providing our property with storm sewers. And none of this appeared, or at least was discussed or raised by the appropriate person at the town who was representative at the meeting. I think, and I do believe that this is true, that it should have been the person from development engineering who was there at the meeting, and he was most certainly there. However, none of this was mentioned. What occurred, and if you look at the plans of the street, there are two pipes in the street outside on Wilson Street. The natural assumption is that one would be for sanitary sewers and the other would be for stormwater management. However, where we are, and only someone who would know this from the town, both of those pipes are actually used for sanitation. And the reason why is because one of the pipes that flows down by gravity feed to a reservoir at the bottom of the street, and the second one is used to pump the sanitation effluent up and back and around and into the sewage treatment plant because of the location where we are right close to the lake. Only someone from the town would know that. And the point would be any normal person would look at those two pipes and say, oh, one's for sanitation and one is for stormwater management. The bottom line in this case was because it wasn't mentioned, it appeared as something months afterwards that we had to deal with, only to find out that it was something that we were then responsible for. All of this with full knowledge that there is in fact stormwater management capability as close as 100 meters away on Lakeshore Road, but we don't have access to it. Think of it this way. It would be like finding out that in the place that you are looking for development, there is no ability to hook up to Oakville Hydro. Somehow you were to provide your own hydro, arrange to get your own generator, and you can't plug into the system. No one would look at that and think that was reasonable. And yet that is exactly what we are doing with regard to stormwater management on our property. We are left to develop our own way of dealing with stormwater runoff simply because there is no way to plug into the system.
Thanks, Jim.
Thinking about?
That's exactly, I just wanted to sort of zero in on the pre-consultation. Your Worship, rather than go further, as I've explained to Mr. Knowlton previously, staff do not have the authority to waive development charges. That would be something that we would do at council. And I'd be more than happy to work with the CAO and the Director of Planning to discuss it further rather than taking up time of council this evening.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Liz Chinna.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Knowlton, for your presentation. I'm not understanding the discrepancy in the $600,000 difference. What did this report not account for?
Well, it's hard for me to know because, firstly, the report actually does not state terms of reference at the outset. So I think that's a flaw in it from the outset. However, if I assume I understand what the terms of reference are that are not stated, I believe that, and again, I believe it was Brandon that prepared it, so let's talk about him. I believe what he did is he prepared a report on costs related to costs that were charged specifically to us by the town of Oakville. And I think, his estimates are correct, but that is nowhere close to the total cost, the actual cost for all of the work that's required in order to be able to, in fact, get our development application approved. All of the costs are detailed there. Now, I would point out that if you look more closely at what I provided you in terms of total cost, it also includes costs for things like, we intend to sell, by the way, one of the units. So we're building one that we will live in, and then we'll sell the second one. And when we do that, we'll have to, or someone will pay things like land transfer tax. So there's an inclusion of the amount for land transfer tax based on what we presume the price would be when we sell it. So there are a number of assumptions, there are a number of things like that that are there that we have not yet paid, but that's all part of the calculation. You have to actually look at the detail to figure it out, but I would be quite happy to go through the detail with you. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Mr. Knowlton. All right, Council, I'll call your attention to the motion that I think we got from Councillor Dudek for consent items 1 and 2, item number 5 and number 6. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and the 4 matters are carried. That brings us, Council, to our first public hearing item. And if there's anyone watching the live stream of this meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting. You'll be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. We have a registered delegation being Catherine McEwen and her team who are available for questions. And we'll wait to see what kind of members of the public may phone in while we entertain the presentation from Kate Cockburn, our planner. Kate, you are up. You have the Zoom, as they say.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. Hi, members of council. Thank you very much. If our IT support would be able to put up the slides for this presentation, please. Very good. Thank you very much. Again, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. This evening, I have an application before you for a draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment submitted by MGO3 Corporation. The report can be found on tonight's agenda on page 65. The purpose of this meeting is to introduce the application to council and to the public and to obtain any further comments for review as related to this application. I will note that the applicant did hold a public information meeting in December of 2019, and there were no members of the public who attended. I would also point out throughout each of these slides, there will be the phone number to call in. If anyone is watching the live stream of this meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095, and we will connect you to the meeting. You will be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. Next slide, please. The subject lands are located on the east side of 6th Line, south of Burnhamthorpe Road East. The lands abut future residential uses to the east and to the south, natural heritage system to the west, and the lands to the north are currently undeveloped but are designated for residential uses and a stormwater pond in accordance with the official plan. The proposal is a continuation of the applicant's registered plan of subdivision and draft plan of subdivision immediately to the south. Next slide, please. The proposal relates to the redevelopment of the lands for the extension of Settlers Road East and Post Road from the subdivision to the south developed by the applicant. Post Road will be extended northerly from MGO North Oakville 1 Phase 1, which is registered in 2018. And Settlers Road will be extended easterly from MGO North Oakville 1 Phase 2, which is currently draft approved and presently subject to a draft plan revision and zoning application. The development will also accommodate 35 residential units comprised of 32 townhouse units located on the east side of Post Road and on the south side of Settlers Road East, and 3 detached dwellings proposed by the applicant at the southeast corner of Post Road and Settlers Road. The proposed park will be merged with lands to the south. However, additional lands are still required to achieve the minimum neighborhood park size. Presently, the combined park size proposed is 3.46 hectares, and 4.26 hectares is required for the total. The future elementary school site adjacent to the park is currently 2.2 hectares in size, but additional lands are to be accommodated to the north to provide for a school block size of 2.43 hectares to 2.89 hectares. On-street parking is currently being reviewed to maximize the number of parking spaces within the development. Each residential unit could accommodate up to 2 parking spaces, which includes 1 surface parking space in the driveway and 1 in the garage. However, until such time as the blocks for the park and elementary school are properly reconfigured to accommodate the minimum size, it is not yet known or not yet clear on how much street parking would be available at this time. So until we are able to firm up the block sizes, on-street parking could be better understood on what would be available on the north side of Settlers Road and on the west side of Post Road. I would also point out that the property has been approved for the 2020 Regional Servicing Allocation Program. Next slide, please. The subject lands are designated neighborhood area and identifies the future park and school within the North Oakville East Secondary Plan. The master plan illustrates a conceptual design from 2008 for the development of North Oakville East planning area. A deviation from the master plan has already been established with a modification to the road work to accommodate the natural heritage system to the southeast through the former Petcor subdivision. Other options can be reviewed provided the principles of the North Oakville plan are maintained, and staff will continue to review the development in relation to the master plan and associated road pattern. The lands have further identified as neighborhood park, elementary school site, and neighborhood center area. Along the south side of Settlers Road and on the east side of Post Road, as indicated, these will be accommodating neighborhood center land uses. There is also a neighborhood center activity node at the intersection of Post Road and Settlers Road East, which will require at least 1 corner of the activity node for non-residential uses, which does not include a school site, as the school is a separate designation with its own policies and principles. Next slide, please. The existing zoning on the subject lands is existing development, and the proposed zoning would be to follow what the applicant has proposed with the associated uses. That would be park, institutional with a modification, neighborhood center with modifications, and general urban with modifications. These modifications would be reflective of the zones currently used in the applicant subdivisions to the south. Next slide, please. These next 2 slides are to reflect the various matters identified by staff and are captured within the staff report. The review of the application will continue, and all comments heard tonight will be addressed in the future recommendation report. The applicant is to provide confirmation that it is a member in good standing with the North Oakville Developer Landowners Association and party to the cost-sharing agreement, consistency with the provincial policy statement and conformity to the growth plan, conformity and coordination with the draft plan of subdivision with the North Oakville East Secondary Plan and Master Plan, The changes in configuration of the proposed Settlers Road and Post Road has impacted the location and the required neighborhood park and school block sizes. The applicant would be required to coordinate their proposal with the future development of the lands to the north, and they are currently in discussions. The design and functionality of the mixed-use blocks located at the neighborhood activity node requires at least one mixed-use or non-residential building. At present, the applicant has provided that their opinion is that the future school site would satisfy this requirement. Staff note that the school is designated separately from neighborhood activity node and has its own set of policies. The coordination of residential reserve blocks within the adjacent plan of subdivision and zoning. And finally, the environmental impact report and functional servicing study would need to be updated to address the West Morrison Creek plan area. Next slide, please. The recommendation before you this evening, Council, is to receive the report and accept any comments provided from the public for staff to consider at a future meeting. I'm happy to answer any additional questions. And on the following slide is, again, more information about calling into this meeting if there are any members of the public listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I was delighted to see that you, on the issues list, you caught the unique interpretation of our OP by the applicant. And I hope that in your discussions with them, you can help them learn to read better. Any members of council? Let's start with Councillor Sanju and then Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. I just have a couple of questions and maybe a comment. I wanted to understand whether there were any additional densification areas around this area and whether these smaller structures were going to be put in place prior to any other denser areas in that area.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if Councillor Sandu could clarify densification areas.
So what I'm trying to say is, in a not very good planning talk, is there a denser structure or higher rise structure that is going to be in that area prior to or after these lower rise buildings will be there?
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I understand the question. At the moment, there is no plans for a mid-rise or other than a ground-oriented structure. So the anticipation is that we would see a townhouse type structure, specifically street townhouses within this particular area. And to reflect on the approvals to the east in the former Petgore subdivision, there is land there that it can accommodate a more denser form, a multi-story, like a 3 to 4 story built form, but that hasn't been submitted as of yet. And that would be further along Settlers Road. And the developments that are to the south are also the applicants as well. And based on their approved plans, draft and registered plans, there are no higher, denser forms of development. That said, there is the expectation that there would be one non-residential or mixed-use building at the intersection of Settlers Road and Post Road. The applicant would have to come forward with a concept that would meet those objectives, and that may mean a multi-story, a 2 or 3 story building on one of those corners.
Thank you, Ms. Cockburn, and thank you to staff for all of this information. It's been very, very helpful. To that effect, I think that it would be beneficial from a long-term perspective to ensure that the homeowners in this area have an understanding of what potentially could be at that node, whether it's in their purchase and sale agreement or whether we can put it in some type of conspicuous location at the sales office as we've done in the past. I think that would be beneficial. That gives us a little bit of an anchor point from a council perspective to be able to go back to the homeowners when they are potentially upset that something's coming up in their backyard and say, actually, you were given fair and welcome notice. So that's certainly helpful. And then is the applicant relying on any potential additions or changes to 6 lines in order to accommodate additional parking? Am I reading that correctly in the information?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this particular development would not be impacted by any of the urbanized improvements on 6th line. That would be their developments to the south. where 6 Line is being urbanized with some on-street parking potentially. The residents, the dwelling units that would be accommodated in this subdivision are more internal on Post Road and on Settlers Road. So any on-street parking would be accommodated on those roads specifically, just due to the location of the park and the school adjacent to 6 Line.
So that would be I think my last comment with the park in the school there. We have faced an enormous amount of challenges with our local school here in Ward 7, it's specifically at Maui. And I think it's already kind of started at the new school as well, NE2. There was an understanding, I think, when planning was going down for the area that the parking available at the school would be a specified number of allotted spaces that would accommodate the growing community and continue to accommodate the school. That hasn't been the case. If we're looking at this from a longevity perspective and something that we want to ensure that people are able to live here for a very, very long time, I would take that away as well from a staff perspective. There isn't any shared parking with the park, George Savage Park, just north of Maui as well. People aren't able to utilize that if they're at the park during the day, during a potential school day. And I think that that's something that we need to take into account from a longevity view for Ward 7, because it's not something that's working right now, and I doubt will work in the future. And then my takeaway for this generally, and I think that staff has heard us very loud and clear when it has come to this, is we need to be very concerned about what the parking standards are in this area. I know that we've got reports and things coming back to us, but we continue to push the agenda that Ward 7 is going to be a transit first community. We can't objectively say to anybody moving into this area that it's a transit first community, because there is no transit. It is working just like the rest of Oakville. There are very, very numerous amount of young families here. And even if there were transit available, I can tell you right now, none of the folks on my street would take it, because they've got 2 or 3 kids that they've got to drop off at multiple locations. And we're putting ourselves into a hole that we're not going to be able to dig ourselves out of. So instead of selling that to our residents and saying that it's actually transit first, I think we should be upfront with them upfront and plan accordingly, so that we can have a flourishing community in the future, instead of situations like we have right now with parking and folks on the street. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adams?
Thank you very much. I wanted to raise the issue of the activity node, and I want to raise that because it's one that I'm seeing in other applications throughout the North Oakville area, and they're coming into the Ward 6 area to the far northeast as well. Can you go through with us more specifically what the requirements are for that node and what the expectations are, and how they could be met by the applicant? I've seen in some of the applicants coming forward in my ward cases where the Madam E. Holmes, who said, well, there's a school in the neighborhood, that's close enough. That's your activity node, and that's certainly not what the expectation was in my view. Can you tell us what the requirements or expectations are?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Back in 2018, OPA 321 was approved, which modified the requirements and policies for the neighborhood center area, and quite specifically to encourage having a functional activity node. It is now required that a mixed use building or non-residential building be accommodated within that intersections on at least one corner. In doing that, it has elevated staff's ability to better enforce the requirement for mixed use building. Now, mixed use has a range of options. We've seen this as a live work. We have seen this as a multi-story building that has commercial at grade. We have seen this as more community service elements as well that could also be accommodated. The applicant's suggestion that it could be a school and the diverse functions that a school can have is not sufficient. Staff have identified that in our report, that the applicant would need to provide an alternative element that is non-residential on one of the other 3 corners available in this development.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification, that information. I look forward to changes then coming forward in the design being put forward by the applicant.
Councillor Elgar. And Councillor Palmer, when Councillor Elgar unmutes himself. I mean after. Councillor Elgar, you have the
Hopefully
Zoom.
I'm there now. Just a question regarding the street width. What's the proposed street width at this point?
The street width at the present time through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, my apologies. The width at the moment in the draft plan has indicated 22 meters. I will defer to the applicant who is here to provide further details as to what would be accommodated within that 22 meter right of way. But that is the right of way that they have established for Settlers Road and Post Road. Both of these streets are the main arteries that will travel through multiple subdivisions in this area. So that is why the width is slightly larger than more of a local road.
Okay, and what you're proposing, you're thinking right now is it will be parking on street also, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, again, the expectation is that there would be an opportunity to provide some on-street parking. It's just not clear how that can be provided as of yet with the needs of the community center and the school and how they would be designed. We have already received a partial facility fit for the park, which has identified a parking lot for park uses, so that might provide for some relief. And to Councillor Sandhu's comments with respect to the school, when it is not in use, whether that presents any opportunities, that's something staff can take back and look at further through this application.
Okay. Now I know there's not, in this particular one, there's not a number of units, but where's the allocation? What allocation is it coming from? Water allocation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, it is my understanding that this is coming from the 2020 allocation program.
So it's part of the 7,118? That's what it's coming from?
I believe so. I will have the applicant confirm with what those obligations are, or perhaps if the director can respond as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Gonna start tracking that. Maybe we can get a report on a regular basis to see. Because I know we were only supposed to say 4,668 units. We hopped it up 52% to build away more. So I'm just kind of curious to see where how much allocation we're already eating up. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The question is, what school board owns that property for the school lands?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, the school lands are marked for the Catholic board, separate board. However, we have received comments from both the public and Catholic board with respect to this application.
Okay, and so is the school on any of the capital priority lists then for this year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd have to go back and double check on where this particular lot lies, unless the director of planning or someone else in council today has an answer for you.
Okay, yes, if you could include that in the next report, that would be great. And then also in terms of the mixed use building, I understand then that would take away some of the developers, either the townhomes that they're proposing for the mixed use building that we're requiring.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, there will be a loss of units, and based on what they've proposed, because the other 3 corners have residential units. However, there is a challenge with respect to the detached units at the southeast corner, as identified in the report. The same OPA 321 no longer permits detached units within the neighborhood center area. So, however, the applicant is choosing to work with their unit availability and provide the required non-res building at the corner. Will be soon to see with the next review.
So if it, for example, was a mixed-use building with commercial at the bottom and residential on top, would there be another notice to the public? Tapping onto my colleague, Councillor Sandhu's comments to let residents know who have purchased in that area what they can expect.
Through the mayor to the councillor, there is a couple ways to address this. So as Councillor Sandu also iterated around notice to the area residents around what this development will have, through the review process and up and including draft plan conditions, the applicant will be responsible to prepare a neighborhood plan of sorts that shows what is approved and proposed for development. At the time that staff are prepared to bring forward a recommendation report, another notice is provided. And it's at that time that staff will have received the necessary input and information to move ahead with the proposal, which would identify how each of these units are going to be accommodated. It will address the on-street parking element and will also address what the built form can be anticipated in one of these corners. So notice will be reissued for that meeting, and those answers will be given at that time.
Okay, and then my last question is, where is the next closest activity node? How much are we spacing out these intersections that have the activity nodes?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, the next activity node is actually to the south on 6th Line and Marvin Avenue, which is part of this developer's applications to the south. As I mentioned, it's within their draft plan that was recently subject to rezoning application and is still under review. So not too far, but it is with proximity for residents to have access to activity nodes within a walking area.
Yes, you're right. It's not too far. And so, yeah, I am interested in seeing what comes forward because from my understanding, there is quite a, I think it might be 5 or 6 story building on Marvin and Post. Is it Marvin and Post you said, right? So I wonder if we need to have that dense of a building at this intersection. I would prefer to have something that is not as dense if there's something right down the street at the next intersection.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, the denser built form you're referring to, I believe, is within the developer's development, but on the west side of 6th Line, known as the West Morrison, Argo West Morrison. And it's at the intersection at the west side, northwest corner of Marvin and 6th Line. They are proposing a multi-story building.
Right, okay.
Right? This particular intersection, again, that's something that we will have to visit with the developer and to see what other opportunities for non-residential buildings can be accommodated.
Okay, so sorry, just to clarify that we have something at Marvin and 6th and we have something at Marvin and Post, and we're anticipating something for Post and Settlers.
There is nothing at Marvin and Post.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Robertson.
When you develop the streets like Settlers Road, because it's going to be attached where schools and parks are, do those, when we talk about on-street parking, are bike lanes automatically included in that design?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, that's something that we would have to review. Again, I'd have to revisit that with our transportation staff in terms of the goals and transportation networks through this subdivision. I do believe that we had anticipated multi-use travel through these roads because they are the larger corridor roads through the subdivision, and that may include bike lane, on-street parking, and drive aisles. But again, we will answer those questions with the forthcoming recommendation report.
Thank you. Thank you for the report.
Thank you. Councillor Haslett-Teal.
Thank you, Ms. Cockburn, for the report. Just further to that around schools, is there a requirement for a road widening to allow for, I'm going to call it a kiss and drop, given that while we would all love them to walk to school, in some of these newer areas, it's very difficult to walk to school given the network and the traffic and the construction. But are the schools required, or is the developer required to widen the road or give a road allowance for something like a kiss and drop?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, this particular type of development is greenfield development. So anything that would be needed to accommodate it for the school site would be reviewed through this process. The school board is very much involved in the application and providing their feedback, as well as incorporating any draft plan conditions. Something like that typically would be provided and accommodated within the school's property as a driveway function, circular driveway function. And this is the reason that we need to ensure that the appropriate amount of land is accounted for through the development to ensure that the school is able to plan for all of its needed facilities. At the moment, the width of road of the 22 meters would not be looking to accommodate, let's say, a lay-by condition, because this is, we're doing this from scratch. We're not trying to infill or fit in the school and make space. But it is something that we will take back, and we will ensure that we have some response from the school board on a facility fit that they're working on for the site.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Madam Clerk, are there any members of the public delegating on this tonight?
The only delegation we have listed is the planning consultant, Catherine McEwen, if anyone member of council has questions of her.
I'm not sure we do. All right, council, who would like to move receipt? Councillor Palmer, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no, oh, sorry. Mr. Simeone, it's time for you to list the additional, if any, conditions or rather issues that you're exploring.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Through you to the council. Staff are to confirm what the allocation program this is coming from. Staff are to confirm where the school sits in terms of provincial funding, and its expected opening date. Staff are to confirm if bike lanes will be included in the final design of Settlers Way, and staff are to confirm if a, quote, kiss and drop, quote, will be accommodated on the school site.
Thank you. I would just ask maybe on the bike lanes, you could broaden that to consider all the aspects of our active transportation master plan. And thank you for that. Any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and that is carried. Council, you're making great progress. I don't know where the whistle's coming from, but I hope it's not bothering you any more than it's bothering me. We can move now to the public meeting report at item number 4, and this is the, says just like the previous one, this is not a, it's as if I have an electronic lisp, I guess. If there's anyone watching the live stream of the meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to the item, turn it that way, all right. We've had technical help here. Maybe it's better now. And you wish to speak to this item, the number to call is 905-815-6095, and we'll connect you to the meeting. You'll be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. We have a number of registered delegations and some considerable interest from the community surrounding the location of this. And we're going to have a presentation from Kate. She's going to two-peat tonight. And Ms. Coburn, you have the Zoom again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it's the Kate Coburn show today. If our friends in IT would be able to pull up the presentation. Thank you. Again, Mr. Mayor, members of council, this evening I have a official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment, which has been submitted by Glenn Schnarr and Associates on behalf of their client Transmetro Limited, who are the owners of the property. The proposal relates to a 3-story, 14-unit apartment building with underground parking, and the report can be found on page 95 of tonight's agenda. And again, the purpose of this meeting is to introduce the application to council and the public and to obtain any further comments for review as related to this application. And as the mayor has already highlighted, again, if there is anyone watching the live stream of this meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095 and we will connect you to the meeting and you will be called upon to speak following the registered delegations. The next slide, please. The subject land is located at the southwest corner of McDonald Road and Reynolds Street. The property is directly across from the former Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital to the east. It abuts detached residential uses to the south and to the west, and there are detached residential units to the north and northeast. Next slide, please. The site contains a vacant 3-story building previously used for medical offices. The use on the property is legal, non-conforming, with the underlying zoning permitting detached residential uses. The subject lands are also designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and are within the Trafalgar Road Heritage Conservation District. As a matter of clarity for tonight's meeting, the lands are located within the delineated built boundary of the growth plan, and as such, growth and development will be focused within the built boundary. This is a correction from the report. Next slide, please. The applicant is proposing a new 3-story, 14-unit apartment building with underground parking. If approved, the applicant intends to provide condominium tenure for the units at a future date. The applicant requires an official plan amendment to change the designation from low-density residential to medium-density residential to permit the 14-unit building at a density of 49.5 units per hectare. The applicant also requires the zoning bylaw amendment to change the zoning from RL5 with the 0 suffix to RM4 with special provisions that reflect the proposed building. Next slide, please. The livable subject lands in the livable Oakville plan are designated low-density residential, which permits detached, semi-detached, and duplex dwelling types at a maximum density of 29 units per hectare. The applicant proposes to change the designation to medium-density residential with a proposed density of 49.5 units per hectare. The medium-density residential designation permits apartment dwellings with a density of 30 to 50 units per hectare. Next slide, please. The existing zoning, despite the commercial use operating historically on the site, is RL5 with the 0 suffix, which permits detached residential units as of right. The application proposes to change the zoning from the RL5-0 to RM4 with modifications that permit the 3-story 14-unit building. The applicant's proposed modifications include reducing the interior side yard, which is the southern lot line, from 4.5 meters to 3 meters, and the front yard setback, which is from Reynolds Street, 6 meters to 5.5 meters. Staff will note that the RL5-0 zone would permit up to 5 detached dwelling units as of right at a density of 17.7 units per hectare. Next slide, please. Since the writing of the staff report, staff have received 26 comments from the public, 1 in support and 25 in objection. As highlighted by this slide, the public comments received have concerns regarding compatibility, tree protection, density, heritage, building orientation, height, privacy, massing and scale, traffic, neighborhood character, building coverage, and balconies. Staff have identified similar concerns and have highlighted them in the matters to be addressed. Next slide, please. This slide reflects the various matters identified by staff to date and are captured within the staff report. This includes consistency with the provincial policy statement and conformity with the growth plan, conformity to the Region of Halton official plan, which would include a holding provision to ensure that a record of site condition is obtained for the property as it transitions from a commercial use to a residential use. Conformity with the livable Oakville plan, including the policies regarding intensification and section 11.1.9. Compliance with the livable by design guidelines, parts A and C, which would include addressing matters such as scale, massing, privacy, and shadow impacts. Consistency with the Trafalgar Road Heritage Conservation District plan, including ensuring that new development respects and complements the prevailing character of the district and discouraging land uses which would be out of keeping or have had detrimental effects on the residential and open character of the district. Providing the road widening and daylight triangle requirements and preserving the treatment for boundary trees located along the interior southerly lot line of the property. In conclusion, staff have put forth the following recommendation for council's consideration, which would be to receive the staff report and hear any comments provided by the public at tonight's proceedings, and that staff will consider such comments as may be provided by council in a future report. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And in the following slide, again, further information regarding delegations on this item.
Thank you very much, Kate. Council, do you have questions? Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, Ms. Coburn, for the presentation, and I want to thank all the residents that have given us lots of feedback. It's a point of pride in Ward 3 that we participate in our democracy, and so thank you to all the council members for reading all the detail. So I want to start with, if you could just confirm for us, what is the current density of McDonald and North Reynolds?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, staff had endeavored to provide for density calculations within the area, and we did not have that information in time for this meeting. So I will be able to go back and provide that at a future meeting. We do know that the density provided within former hospital site redevelopment was within the low density residential standards at under 29 units per hectare.
So that actually leads me to my next question is, so the McDonald's and Allen development, there was a great deal of consultation in the South Central land studies. And my understanding was that we have a report somewhere that would potentially put those units that at around 14 units per hectare. Can you, when you come back, confirm that for us?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, that's not a problem. We will provide for the densities within the surrounding area at a future report.
So if in fact it is around 14 units per hectare, this application is quite significantly different in terms of the neighborhood. Would you give us an idea of how you would describe the character of the neighborhood that this development is to be in?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Through the report, staff have been able to highlight the specific policy framework around how this application will be evaluated, which includes recognizing the heritage district that the property is within, which plays an important role on reviewing the application, as well as considering sections 11.1.9, which also speaks to ensuring that new development maintains a compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood character. So there will be a multitude of elements that would play into how the character of this area is defined through a future report.
Okay. Could you tell us what the height of the homes are along McDonald and the Northern Reynolds approximately?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I don't have an exact meter measure of each of these properties, but in general, they range between 1.5 or 2-story units within this area.
Okay. And would they be around the 9-meter mark that is within the zoning?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, that is unable to be seen at this point. The neighborhood is quite historic, and there might be dwellings that had been established well before the zero suffix was applied, which is what restricts the building height to 9 meters. It is quite likely that some of these buildings would exceed the metric in height, but would be within the 2-story element. We'd have to do an assessment of the area to confirm if there would be any 2.5 story houses within this area, especially within the district.
Do we know what the height is of the old medical building?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, the medical building is currently sitting at 3 stories in height, and I believe it is just shy of 15 meters. I can have the applicant provide confirmation of that through their presentation.
Okay, I think that's an important number to know and how it's relative to the rest of the neighborhood. So I want you to help me a little bit with this orientation going from from Reynolds to McDonald, and how that's affecting the side yard and the southern lot line setbacks. Normally, we would see something like a 7.5 meter setback from another property. But this seems to be suggesting, because they've changed the orientation, and maybe I'm not understanding this correctly, that they can the minimum, sorry, the number is 4.5, and they're actually asking for 3. So do I have that correct, that what they're asking for is significantly different than what would normally happen in the neighborhood?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, the modifications that the applicant is requesting is with respect to a medium density built form. In which case the requirements of medium density built form is not going to be the same as detached built form. So you don't get the large setbacks that you would typically see with a detached house than you would with a medium density built form, whether that would be an apartment building or a townhouse. They just are a more dense form of development. So in this particular case, the applicant has chosen to orient the building entrances from McDonald, which is actually the flankage yard. Reynolds Street is the shortest lot line, and so the zoning bylaw would view Reynolds Street as the front yard. And therefore, the setbacks that they're requesting are reflective of how they've oriented the building with respect to those requirements.
Okay, so I'm still on setbacks and all of that element. When you talk about urban design, and when we hear about urban design, some of the distinguishing features of that are often how close to the road, the more it is more into the road network. Do I have that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, urban design is a multifaceted viewpoint of how development will proceed. Some of that will include how the building reflects with the streetscape and to create a particular character for that streetscape. So in a downtown setting, for example, the objective would be to have buildings very close to the street to create a particular character and a look and feel of the street. In a residential area, that would be somewhat different, and there might be a requirement for more open spaces, larger setbacks, etc. So the urban design elements with respect to this development will be continued to be evaluated, as staff noted in our issues to be addressed, to ensure that the development is meeting those objectives.
So thank you for that, because that was the description that I was hoping to hear. So really, this design is currently, as it is proposed, is an urban design, not a residential design. It's a downtown design, not a residential design, would be my comments. Can you help me out with the balconies? So we have previously had discussions at council about balconies and about the overlook into someone's backyard. Has there been discussions with the applicant in regards to how the neighborhood across all of South Oakville in particular feel about these balconies?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, balconies are something that are permitted as of right within an urban, or rather a medium density residential built form, especially for an apartment building. There are regulations that are associated with how big a balcony can get, and the review of the balconies is ongoing with respect to this application. In the surrounding residential area, the zero suffix zone actually prohibits balconies from being accommodated on detached dwellings. So part of staff's review will be to include how, again, to respond to a compatibility measure, how is this building with these types of open spaces compatible with a surrounding area that does not have them?
Thank you for that description. I can readily understand, particularly in the middle of COVID, why somebody would want a balcony. I'm just not comfortable with how this is designed within a residential neighborhood with a balcony. Can you talk to me a little bit about the boundary trees, these beautiful century-old walnuts that border the property? There's concern raised about how we can protect those, and if in fact we really truly can protect them with an underground parking structure. Is there further due diligence that would be required to have an assurance if this were to go forward?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, tree protection is also a matter that staff have raised that will continue to be evaluated. And the protection of those trees may also dovetail with some of the other items that we've discussed around privacy and overlook and the setbacks. So again, there might be some combination of elements that would lend itself to preserving additional trees within the property and on the boundary.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, and I will turn it over to my council colleagues.
The next speaker I recognize is Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton, to Ms. Coburn, I'm trying to understand when I read this. This is an RL5 zone right now, correct? So they as of right, they can build 17.7 units per hectare on this property, right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, the RL5 zone is the underlying zoning, you are correct, and it permits detached dwellings. And based on the area of the property and the frontage along McDonald, it gives them an opportunity to accommodate up to 5 detached dwellings on the site, which translates to a density on the property of 17.7 units per hectare.
Now, how does that compare to the housing that's already there? Would that compare to what the RL5 zoning all the way along? They'd basically be about the same size of lots with the same frontage, just like everything would be compatible with the existing neighborhood?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, so this location of this property is at an interesting intersection, and if I could point you to the figure within the report, if that's easier, that highlights the zoning in the area. Let me just for 1 second. I believe this would be figure 5. Figure 5 in the report. The subject site is zoned RL5-0. Immediately to the west is RL4-0. So those properties actually require less frontage per lot. And the properties immediately east, which have been accommodated in the future development of the old hospital site, are RL3, which is an even denser form of low density. So those lot sizes are even smaller. So the RL5, which you would see on the north side and to the south, there is a wide range of lot fabric, of lot widths and lot depths. So an RL5 zone in this area would be accommodated and fit in within that lotting pattern because it would provide for a diverse lotting pattern here.
The RL5 zoning would fit in with it.
Correct.
That's what I heard you say? Yes. Okay. So yeah, I can see the RL4 on Trafalgar Road because it's more of a major more of a thoroughfare. But I guess I'm trying to think, in our livable Oakville plan, like we want to maintain the existing neighborhoods, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as we've stated in the report, the livable Oakville plan does provide for flexibility within our stable neighborhoods, stable residential areas for some infill development, and that can take many forms in terms of what that housing might be and what the land and lot fabric might look like. So it would be our requirement and our obligation to review those policies in conjunction with this application to ensure that those elements are being maintained by whatever the application evolves to.
Okay, and that's what you're going to be doing going forward to see if it is the RL5 is consistent or if the RL5 versus the RM4. Okay, I appreciate that. I look forward to this coming back. This is going to be an interesting one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar, for the understatement of the evening. Councillor Giddings, I think I saw your hand next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Coburn, a couple of questions for you. Now, you talked about the current zoning and what they're applying for. So currently, if they were to build single family, that would be 5 units that could be constructed there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as of right, without any modifications to the zoning bylaw, they could obtain 5 units on the property, yes.
And they're requesting medium density. How close are they to high density with what they're asking for?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, the density they are proposing is 49.5 units per hectare. The limit on a medium density classification is 50 units per hectare. So at 50.1 or 50.5, they would be into a high density classification.
All right, thank you for that. In the urban design brief that we received from the proponent, in the introduction, it provided details on how the proposed development can be effectively integrated into the surrounding community with minimal disruption. You had a lot of details in terms of the provincial policy statements and so on. This aspect would be through the Heritage Conservation District Plan for the area.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, yes, the Heritage Conservation Plan will definitely play a strong role in evaluating changes to the property. The Heritage District does not recognize the building per se as a heritage value, but it will control what gets built on the property to ensure that the overall character of the Heritage District is maintained. And that the new development would be compatible, again, whatever form that might be.
All right, and with this, good point, this came to the Heritage Advisory Committee several months ago. And as the report detailed, it talked about how there's nothing worthy of the existing building that would dictate it be preserved. That wouldn't stop a proponent from rebuilding the insides of it or changing the outsides and keeping the same existing footprint, would it?
Through Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, no, adaptive reuse of the existing building wouldn't require, obviously they wouldn't have to tear it down, but it wouldn't offend the district plan. However, the same official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications that the applicant has submitted would be required to do so.
All right. The staff report discusses a possible need for a road widening and daylight triangle at McDonald and Reynolds. Could you give me a little more information on that? Because if that is necessary, that would significantly reduce the footprint available, would it not?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, in speaking with my colleagues in engineering and construction, from where those comments come from, widening on the is 1 meter into the property, and the daylight is 5 meters by 5 meters at the intersection. It would appear that the daylight triangle is intended to accommodate some of the infrastructure that is already existing at the intersection, because this is a lighted intersection. So it would provide for better queuing space, opportunities for delivery of services of that infrastructure. The 1 meter setback or 1 meter road widening requirement on McDonald, interestingly enough, has already been taken on the 2 properties that are immediately west of this site. I suspect it was through a previous consent application to divide the lot a few years back. We will provide some of the details of the confirmation of the required widenings through the forthcoming report.
Thank you. You have a number of details, as I said, on provincial policies. Is there anything in terms of the proximity to a mobility hub that you could provide feedback on when this comes back as part of your recommendation?
Through you, Mayor, to the councillor, yes, the property is within 800 meters of the Oakville GO station. And we could provide comments to those details at a forthcoming report as well.
All right, and last question, it talks about 21 trees, a number being removed, yet there are plans to to put in a wrought iron fence and grass and shrubs and so on. Just curious if you have any further information on the landscaping. Is the wrought iron fence and shrubs in lieu of trees, or just curious?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, you would have to ask the applicant at his turn to address council. Again, staff have indicated already that tree preservation is a concern of ours. So our goal would be to ensure that any new development on the property would be in the best interest of preserving trees and supporting that existing neighborhood character.
All right, and Councillor Hazlitt-Field talked about the setback on Reynolds being reduced to 3 meters. I see in the design direction from the proponent that the proposed side yard, which is the 3 meters, isn't anticipated to have any adverse impacts on the relationship of the building to the street. Could that cause an adverse effect to the resident to the south, though, that 3 meters?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, that's something that we would have to look at more fulsomely through the next phase of the review of this application to understand the existing massing versus a proposed massing at that particular setback. We do recognize that the building is set a little closer to Reynolds Street today and does present an interesting mass. However, there is a larger setback from the southerly property line to the existing building than would otherwise be provided by the applicant's proposal. The building is much closer to that southerly property line. So that will inform our review.
I appreciate that. Could we also look at, Councillor Elgar was talking about the details on the RM4, and the proponent talks about the setback being consistent with the RM4 zoning, but the zoning on that would be a 9-meter height, and I believe the proposal's for 15. So if that could be included when you come back, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. I guess, are there other questions? I'm not seeing any other questions. Madam Clerk, would you call the delegations?
Our first listed delegation for this item is Sally Reynolds.
Ms. Reynolds, you're welcome, and we're looking forward to hearing your information. Well, let's move her down and go to the next delegation, and we'll rotate back when we have her again.
So our next delegation is Doug McKirkin from TCRA.
And you have him up and ready? Mr. McKirkin, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, councillors. I suspect that much of what I was going to say is redundant, given Ms. Coburn's presentation and all the questions that have been asked. However, if I could get the slides up. Perhaps go straight to the next slide, please. So you've already seen a photograph of this building. This was taken in the winter. I guess the main point is that we think it's an eyesore. And if we can have the next slide, you've already seen this picture as well. But what you should know is that we do appreciate that it's attractive, but it's massive, and that's our key issue. It's approximately 60% lot coverage. The RL5-0 lot coverage permitted is, I think, 35%. And at almost 15 meters, it's more than 1.5 times higher than allowed by the 5-0. If I could have the next slide. You've seen this picture as well. The red arrow shows where the site is, where the building will be. So these are just some comparisons. Current zoning, 29 units per site hectare, up to that, versus up to 50 for RM4. Ms. Coburn, the report, the South Central Public Land Study Report of February 28, 2013, page 30, records the average density of single-family residential properties in the area as 14 units per site hectare. And that's what Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel was pursuing. So the second 2 points I think I've already mentioned. If I can have the next slide. This just locates the Trafalgar Road Heritage Conservation Area or District. Sort of superimposes it on the plan and shows you where this site is. It is just inside the eastern boundary of the Heritage District. Could I have the next slide? I apologize for the complexity of this slide, but it's an important slide. I'll also apologize for the fact that the south elevation, which is the bit at the top you're looking at, is not on the same scale as the plan. And that was because we couldn't figure out how to cut and paste properly. Anyway, if I could say that the real problem that we have, apart from massing, is with the south setback and south elevation. And the yellow in the south elevation and the plan highlight the proposed balconies. So looking at the plan, the thing to note is that the edges of the balcony align with the edges of the 3 internal stairwells on the south side of the building. So if you look at the plan and you see those things that look like teeth of a comb sticking out to the south, those are the internal stairwells. And the balconies, the edge of the balconies align with the southern extremity of those stairwells, and the whole is within 3 meters, or is 3 meters from the south lot line. The staff report, I can't remember which page it is, but I think it's page 12, talks about the south wall of the building being mostly 9 meters from the south lot line, and you know, we respectfully disagree with the staff report. We think that the real south boundary of the property is the balconies and those interior stairwells. I should say, just in passing, that Ms. Coburn has been incredibly helpful to all of us, and we're very grateful for everything all the advice she's given us. Turning to the south elevation, you can see just by looking at the yellow how much the balconies dominate. The building's appearance will be that of a cliff with caves at regular intervals.
To live in Oakville and to be at this meeting and hear you all tonight.
Okay, I'm carrying on. So the last point about that is that the backyard of Sally Reynolds' property, 350 Reynolds, will be a goldfish bowl. Can I have the next slide, please? So TCRA agrees with the owner's first point in his rationale for the amendments. The site, as it is, does not contribute to the cultural heritage value of the district. But we don't think that intensification, which we support, or the diverse built character form of the neighborhood justifies such a change of massing within the heritage district. So in conclusion, the next slide, please. We urge the council to defer a decision on the proposed amendments, and when you finally get to that point, and request revision to the design of the building, the proposed building, to address the problems we've noted, massing, south setback, and balconies. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. McCurgan. Let me ask if there's any councillors with questions for you. Thank you, Doug. Madam Clerk, would you please see if Ms. Reynolds is available?
Yes, Ms. Reynolds, if you would like to unmute yourself and give your presentation.
Welcome, Ms. Reynolds. Council's looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, and I apologize to everyone for that technical glitch. Greetings, everybody. Mayor Burton, the Town of Oakville councillors, the Planning Department, TCRA, and any other residents that are on the call or at the meeting. I am really, really thrilled with the proceeds of this council meeting so far tonight, and I must just say my heart is pounding with gratitude for everyone's support and for Kate, your unbelievable, fantastic work, and especially for all the help you gave me in trying to navigate what is often a confusing subject for a lay person who doesn't know all the ins and outs of planning. So thank you all very much. Again, my name is Sally Reynolds, and by sheer coincidence, I live at 350 Reynolds Street. I'm addressing you tonight because I am vehemently opposed, naturally and obviously, to the Transmetro application right next door to me. I've lived in the house for 19 years and been a very proud owner of this heritage home. If this development is approved, it would ruin my whole property. The entire north side of my 200-foot property would be in shadow. 14 large balconies would overlook my yard. My privacy would be gone. And the century-old trees would likely be destroyed, if not immediately, over time. So my house is little. It's a 1.5-story, 18 feet in height, 1,100 square foot home built in the Gothic Revival vernacular style. The lot fronts Reynolds Street about 55 feet and goes back 200 feet and borders 349 Trafalgar, which is a heritage property right next to McLaughlin College. So my backyard is beautiful. It has huge trees that are give such an enormous canopy. It's got long lawns and gardens, and I look out on the beautiful red heritage carriage house of 349 Trafalgar. So sure, we had a lot of noise and activity with 358 Reynolds over the years and the hospital. But, at night and on weekends, it was always empty and quiet. And we utilized our backyard and had family gatherings and social events there. And it was wonderful. We bought the house because of its heritage and its location and its little charm, and because we wanted this expanse of a third of an acre lot, the beautiful tree canopy, southwest exposure, and the gorgeous views. So preserving all of these is certainly a key priority, and as many of you have already discussed, many elements of the proposed development would not preserve those. I was going to be much longer than 10 minutes and had to edit today, but now that I've heard everyone, I'm not going to repeat and be redundant, as Doug said, and thank you, Doug, for contributing tonight. We all know about the Trafalgar Road Conservation District and its importance to the community and how the whole area is distinguished from the larger community through all kinds of historical associations with the growth and development of the boundaries of the original Oakville town site, all the early settlers, many of whom have streets named after them, like the Chisholms and Freestones and etc. There's a huge range and diversity in the architectural heritage of the frame and brick residential developments. And it's a very mature residential landscaping community, which is well maintained and is very scenic and has private front yards with hedges and fences and planting beds. So it's a very significant area that we all know and recognize in the town of Oakville, and it satisfies the official plan requirements that respect that heritage conservation district designation. So the lot beside me that we're discussing tonight is currently zoned, as we've all just heard over and over again, residential low 5-0, which would permit up to 5 semi-detached homes. So on that note, I did a manual hand count myself. If you take, or if you picture in your mind, Trafalgar to the west, to Watson to the east, and Inglehart, not Cornwall, but maybe Inglehart, to Sumner, it's about 25 blocks of Old Oakville. And in those 25 blocks of Old Oakville, there are 488 addresses or building sites. And when I did a count, 98% of them are single-family homes. 98%. And they're not just, mass new development cookie-cutter homes. Every single one is single-detached and unique architecturally. That's why we love Old Oakville. Given the official plan, and thanks, Kate, again, for your help with this, Part D 11.9, it's not compatible with the existing neighborhood, this development, in its scale, height, or massing. And it's not compatible with the setbacks, the orientation, or the separation of distances to my next door neighborhood. We've discussed the transition in height from gradation. The design does attempt to do that, but at 47 or 45 feet, I think I heard tonight, to my little house at 18 feet, a 30-foot gap. 30 feet in gradation is not, eliminated by a couple of pretty towers on the top of it. The lotting patterns we've all discussed in terms of the density. So really, just, to my specific issues, naturally, number one is my privacy. If I had, 14 balconies at 500 square feet, that's over 7,000 square feet of net new intrusion. And it also means the accompanying 14 balconies either full of people or barbecues or noise or parties or music or chatter. So the privacy would be completely obliterated, as it would for my next door neighbor too, with 2 young girls. The setbacks and all of those details we've discussed, quite a lot tonight. I won't really talk about that. Trees, okay, trees again we've kind of discussed, but Oakville cares so much about tree canopy. Oakville cares so much about nurturing and existing, and if a tree comes down, it's replaced right away. Our tree canopy is one of the most beautiful highlights of the whole town. And with 100-year-old trees having to be destroyed for the sake of a developer, I think would be an environmental crime. I really do. And I know there's a lot of sentiment from other neighbors around that. And I'm sure there's a lot of agreement on that at council, and I'm hearing that tonight, so that's great. Of course, there would be way more traffic, and I think a new traffic study should happen, taking into account all the new development on McDonald Hospital lands and Allen and townhouses and the proposed condo up at Trafalgar and Cornwall. Lots and lots of activity happening. Noise is an issue. No one's talked about it, but I did think about this. Where are the recycling bins and where are the garbage bins? And how often are the big forklift beeping, backing up trucks going to come? And where are they? Lighting. How much lighting, not just ambient lighting from 14 residents' houses in their natural windows, but balcony, patio lighting, motion sensor lighting, the property itself lighting for its own security. That could well be a lot of light pollution facing my property. Air quality, I don't know much about that, but having an underground mechanical exhaust system shoot out right through my property line can't be good. It just, has to compromise the air quality, and it can't be good for old trees either. I can't imagine. And lastly, this whole issue of creeping. If this development went through, I'm not on council and I'm just a resident, but I think, and many neighbors agree, that it would really set a very slippery precedent. We all know developers are allowed to purchase properties and they're allowed to apply for amendments and apply for rezoning. But, Oakville has a responsibility, I think, to really enforce its policies of having any new development to be within character of the neighborhood and to address all the heritage objectives of the heritage plan. This corridor was never identified as a potential intensification area that I know of, but it's always been talked about as a very stable heritage district.
Ms. Reynolds,
neighborhood.
I regret having to call your attention to the fact that 10 minutes has elapsed quite some time ago.
Thank you. I'm very sorry. Excuse me. Thank you very much for your attention and your attention to this matter.
Thank you. As you noted, many of the points have been raised, in fact, by members of council too. So your issues have certainly been registered, and many of them are in the staff report as well, showing that staff have recognized them. So I thank you very much for the time you've given us tonight, and I'll ask council if there's any questions of Ms. Reynolds. Ms. Reynolds, there's no questions, so thanks very much for your contributions. Madam Clerk.
Thank you.
The next delegation, please.
The last listed delegation is David Capper.
Mr. Capper, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Your Worship. Can you hear me okay?
Mr. Capper, we hear you, and you're welcome to begin.
Thank you, sir. If I may ask for the IT department's assistance in uploading the presentation that we have provided. Thank you very much. Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. My name is David Capper. I'm planning consultant with Glenn Schnarr & Associates, and we are the planners on record for Trans Metro Limited for the subject property. I'm joined this evening by Bill Hicks of Hicks Design Studios, who is the project architect on this project. As well, we have Esteban Campion from Wilson Chung Consultants, who are the project traffic engineer. Our involvement this evening is part of an ongoing dialogue with the town and area residents regarding the proposed development application. We're here this evening as a resource for council and for area residents. Part of our role is to provide an overview of our client's application and answer any questions that may arise. But more importantly, to listen to any concerns that are raised and or comments that are provided. We will use this information to provide our client with some feedback on how best to address the concerns and comments that are received this evening. Just very quickly as background for council, ourselves and our client hosted a public open house on November 6th of last year. The intent of that meeting was to provide information about the proposed development and gather feedback. We were joined by the ward councillors as well as about 30 area residents. And during that meeting, we provided a detailed explanation of the proposed development, the planning process that we anticipated, as well as a summary of the future planning and public process. In terms of the concerns we heard that evening, we specifically heard concerns about traffic and cars exiting the parking ramp onto McDonald Road. We heard concerns about density as well as the mass of the building, shadowing, and potential light pollution. And these were all raised by residents not only immediately abutting the property, but surrounding as well. So with that feedback and the feedback we're going to receive this evening, we are going to discuss it with our client, and hopefully we'll be able to come back with council with, at the very least, some answers to some of those questions, but ideally some solutions to some of the problems and concerns that are raised. We have prepared a short presentation for this evening, and it's intended to illustrate how we get to the point that we've got a 3-story building being proposed on the subject property. As is noted by all of the presentations this evening, the subject property is located within the Trafalgar Road Heritage Conservation District. It's designated as low-density residential, and it's zoned as RL5, and the only permitted use within the, at least residential use permitted within the RL5 zone, are single detached dwellings. In terms of the OP designation, the maximum density that could be permitted under the existing official plan is roughly 8 units. And then as Kate has mentioned, with respect to the RL5 zone, the maximum you could reasonably develop the property with is 5 single detached dwellings. In terms of the lands surrounding the subject property, there's no argument that they're predominantly single detached dwellings from a residential perspective, but they are varied as well. And I think it's an important distinction to make for those that are participating in this process. If I could ask for the next slide, please. So this is the existing airfoot of the existing neighborhood, and what we've highlighted in the dashed yellow line is the subject property. We've also identified those existing high density sites, medium density sites, and then the proposed low density sites that are part of the hospital lands area, as well as the existing and proposed institutional areas and uses. So although it's fair to say that the property is predominantly surrounded by single detached dwellings in a low density residential format, we also need to point out that there are these existing medium and high density properties that exist within the community and make up part of that community character that is being spoken of this evening. Next slide, please. So this is one of those high density sites, and this is at the corner of northwest corner of Lawson and Reynolds. Next slide, please. And just across the street, you'll notice the new institutional community center, the town of Oakville. Next slide. And again, another example of an existing high density designated 3.5-story building that is immediately adjacent to a residential low density single detached dwelling. If I could ask for our friends in IT to just cycle through the next 3 slides. I'm just going to point out other examples of high density designations, buildings that are designated for high density uses within not only the Trafalgar Heritage District, but adjacent to the site as well. This is again on the west side of Reynolds. This is actually on the east side of Reynolds, so it's outside of the Heritage Conservation District. And in the background, you'll see, and in the next slide, this is the recent approval for 331 Shedden. And finally, if I could just ask a pause here, this is also an important part of the context of the subject property. What we've done here is we've taken a 500-meter pedestrian shed and an 800-meter pedestrian shed from the town's Midtown Oakville GO Station and Mobility Hub area. What you'll see is the subject property is immediately outside of the 500-meter pedestrian shed, but certainly within the 800-meter pedestrian shed. So it's within this context of not only the single detached residential surrounding development, but also the existing medium and high density uses that exist in the community that our client has developed the plan that's in front of you this evening. At this point in time, I'd like to turn over the presentation to Mr. Hicks. Mr. Hicks is going to discuss the design exercise that he has gone through in order to develop the proposal that's before you. And I'm hopeful that it would have gone a lot more. There you go. Thank you, sir.
And can everyone hear me?
Mr. Hicks, we can hear you well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
In the limited time, Madam Clerk, would you stop the clock? In the limited time that you have left, I would suggest to you, Mr. Capper and Mr. Hicks, that you should address planning issues at this time, because the point of this meeting is to accumulate the planning issues that the staff will be basing their recommendation on. That's free advice. You're entitled to ignore it. But with that, I'll ask you to resume. Go ahead, Mr. Hicks. Madam Clerk, wait to resume on the clock. Mr. Hicks,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members. I am, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through some of the details. We've heard a number of different things, but to summarize some of them, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I think we can do to meet some of the concerns of the residents. Certainly, it's a very unique site. When we looked at it from an urban design, if we can put the next slide up on the site there, when we looked at it from an urban design perspective and from simply a design perspective, there's a number of things we wanted to try and do, and that was to break down the facade into a number of different elements to articulate that facade with different materials, etc. If you go to the next slide, which shows the rendering. So we tried to break it down into a 2-story with the 3rd story built into the roof. The existing building is just under 15 meters. This building is similar in height to that building when you measure it to the midpoints of roofs, etc. But a number of things we've tried to create, multiple front doors, etc., etc. So I'm not going to go through all of those details because I think what we did here, and I was pleased to hear that the Residents Association actually thought it was an attractive building, but obviously it's too dense and too massive for them. So I think some of the main issues that I've heard being talked about are certainly the privacy issue, the tree preservation issue. We do have an arborist on our team that will be addressing that, and we recognize that as we go through this process, there will ultimately be some changes that we are proposing to make to the building, and we're here to listen, and this is the second opportunity we've had to hear from the public. So I think we can deal with some of the privacy concerns. The 6 that are on the main floor in terms of balconies are really no different than what one finds in a regular backyard protected by a screen fence. Third floor, there's some opportunities to change how those balconies overlook so they don't necessarily look to the south. So we're probably talking more about the balconies on the middle 6 units, 2 of which are more directly related to Ms. Reynolds' house and 4 of which look into the backyard. So it's been identified as a concern, and we're definitely going to look at that and listen to it. We think that we'll be able to show that there's not really an overshadowing issue. We're certainly sitting to the north of it. Boundary trees are important to us. The new landscaping will be robust. There was concerns expressed about the back or the rear yard setback of 3 meters. Most of the building is at 9 meters. It's the stairwells that are at 3, and the terraces are at 3 as well. There's some opportunities in that case to reduce that. Part of it relates to the underground parking, which was an important aspect of trying to take all that parking and hide it so that we didn't have issues with the garbage pickup and things like that, all of which are hidden. So they're not going to see it in the communities to the south. So I think I've appreciated the comments that I've heard from the neighbors. We know that we're still in a case of, or a situation where we're going to respond to that. We have been to Heritage. We've heard some positive comments and some concerned comments from them as well. We think that the building can continue to be developed in an architectural manner to make it even stronger. Obviously, we have to talk more about the massing and density, but as an architect, I believe that it is an appropriate development on the site, and I know we'll have disagreement from the residents in that matter, but we think it can be done sensitively, and if we can deal with the overview and the balconies and the trees, we think that we have a development that is quite attractive and an appropriate development for the site. So I may let David address any other planning issues, but I do appreciate everyone coming forward, and I appreciate the first meetings that we've had and hearing from the ward councilors, et cetera. But we think there's many opportunities to improve it, and that's why we're here to listen. So.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. I know that your card rate is probably greater than David's, so council appreciates the time that you gave the meeting. Council, are there questions for the applicant, or the applicant's representatives, I should say? Well, thank you very much, Bill and Dave. Are there any wrap-up remarks you want to make, Mr. Capper?
Through you, Your Worship, just one minor point with respect to the road widenings that were mentioned. The site plan that's been submitted to the town does account for those road widenings. So they can be accommodated without impact to the location of the building. The net effect of that would be reduced setbacks for the building from the property line, because the property line is moved closer into the property. But other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much for that. I still don't see any questions, so I thank you very much for your contributions to our meeting.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, are there any other delegations? All right, Council. I think at this point I'll turn to the Planning Director and see if he caught any new issues that Kate hadn't already listed in her report. Mr. Simeoni.
Thank you, Your Worship. To the members of council, I think some of them may have been caught in the report, but I wanted to make sure I captured them all. So staff are to prepare a density analysis of the immediate neighborhood. Staff are to confirm the density in the town's South Central Public Land Study. Staff are to confirm the heights of the homes in the immediate area, and this also includes the number of stories. Staff are to confirm the height of the existing medical building. Staff are to consider compatibility with the balconies and resultant overlook issues with the abutting residential neighborhood. Staff are to provide details with respect to the daylight triangle that is required. Staff are to provide details with respect to the mobility hub, being the Oakville GO station. Staff are to consider the impacts as a result of the reduced setback proposed to the southerly property line. And staff are to report back on the impact of the proposed 15-meter height versus the 9-meter height.
That sounds pretty comprehensive to me. Any member of council see anything missing or hear anything missing? All right. Which of you Ward 3 people would like to move this? Don't be shy. Councillor Giddings, thank you very much. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and that carries. I believe we may have got to the point where we have conducted all of the public business on this agenda, and if I'm correct, that would make it appropriate for a counselor to move that the committee resolve into a closed meeting session for the purpose of dealing with a matter pertaining to litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality, and receiving advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with respect to item C1, the LPAT appeal with Vogue Wycliffe Oakville concerning the property at 3171 Lakeshore. This permission for a meeting closed to the public is in the Municipal Act and in our procedure bylaw. Councillor Sanju, I'm sorry. Councillor O'Meara was first, so we'll take the motion from him. Any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. The motion carries. So now, Council, you've earned a 5-minute break while technical staff set us up for a meeting closed to the public, after which we will return to public to close the overall meeting of Planning and Development Council. So technically, I'm going to say we're in recess right now.
It should be reasonably well understood that each piece was made by hand, and that each image is different for that reason. So it's very clear that I'm not using any sort of mass-produced or mass production technique. What I'm using are tools and my own hands to carve each piece out individually. This is really about the handmade process or the maker's mark in that sense. The process of throwing, essentially, whether you're making a cup or a vase or a bowl, the process is essentially the same. It starts with wedging your clay, preparing the clay, making sure it's nice and even and consistent for throwing. You want to avoid air bubbles or chunks or bits. So you wedge that clay to get it nice and even. It goes onto the wheel. First step is centering, which involves holding the clay in place so that, basically, the whole idea is not to force the clay, but to be nice and steady so that the clay centers itself onto the wheel, at which point you're ready to open it up. What most people love about clay is the feeling that it provides infinite possibility and opportunity. It may look like mud at first glance, but it's basically mud that can hold its shape, that can be carved, it can be wheel thrown, it can be pressed into sheets, it can be shaped into pretty much any idea that comes to mind, provided it has a physical form, or it can express things without physical form in a different way as well. It really is a material without much limitation, except for the limitation that we provide. So it has the opportunity to provide almost a limitless canvas for the artist. All right. So I've centered, I've opened up the pot. Now I'm ready to pull up the wall. Just basically getting the height of the piece. It took me at least 2 years to become a proficient thrower, like to a point where I was happy with what was coming out. But at this point, I've had about 15 years worth of throwing experience, and I can honestly say that my throwing is better now than it was in the past. Although it's changed to some degree as well, but it's definitely an ongoing process because there's always room to grow. There's fine tuning that happens in each shape. So the more it's one of those activities, the more you do, the better you become at it. And then after you've pulled, you're going to do the fine-tuning details in terms of adjusting the shape. So pretty much everything starts with a cylindrical form, and then you sort of work your way out from there. I think for most clay artists, the process is definitely very personal from beginning to end. So we think of an idea, and then it's our job to bring that idea to life into an object, or a sculptural piece, or what have you. But it's a personal process. It's a journey where we have to give something a life of its own. What I love about the potter's wheel is partly just the process. It's an enjoyable process to work with the wheel, but also it provides a degree of structure. It can help you generate a shape much faster than building at the table. But then it's up to the individual or the artist to understand what they can do with that shape. If it can become more than what it is, if it's necessary, or if it isn't, it's simply a beautiful shape on its own. I've been teaching here at Queen Elizabeth Park Community Cultural Center for roughly 2.5 years, or 3 years. My first experience was intro to throwing, actually to Town of Oakville staff. We had a great time. And I've since taught kids classes, adult classes, intro to ceramics. Generally speaking, though, in the past, I'd focused more on, I was focusing more on the one-off courses. So we have a variety of weekend warrior workshops, which are just a chance for parents, kids, or just adults and whatnot to come in, get an experience working in clay without having to enroll in a full class. But it's been a ton of fun. We've made everything from teapots to piggy banks to handmade bowls, wheel throwing workshops, and we have tons more coming up. Just this week we'll have a wind chimes workshop. So there's a ton of different things happening in terms of teaching. Okay, yeah, you guys, you're all getting off to a good start. I think everybody's getting off to a good start. Okay, how's my horse coming along? Does that look better? A little bit?
You have to smoothen it out.
Yeah, but I'm smoothing it, yeah. That's what I've been working on. Yeah, that's a good idea. About making the shape of it, okay? So here, I'm gonna help you make a couple coils. So I'm gonna take some of this off. Do you wanna do this? I've seen kids of all ages and backgrounds enjoying the creative process. Sometimes it's about expressing an idea. Sometimes it's about recreating their favorite cartoon. You name it. I've seen a lot of different things come out of that place in terms of creativity from kids. But most importantly, I think it's given them a medium to express themselves. When it comes to the carved work, it tends to be the side of myself that's a little more serious or classical in the sense of work that's supposed to be quiet in the sense of not overly whimsical or not too pop culture, but more about being classically beautiful in the sense of aesthetically beautiful. But I guess I've been carving for quite some time in clay. It's been a while, but I guess I really only started carving more seriously, let's say in about the last 10 years or so. It is a time-consuming practice, so it's not something you can do every day. Just because you still have to get the other pieces made. So if you're devoting a lot of time to carving it really does slow down the rest of your practice.
The carving that he's doing, which has, I feel like, a more serious feeling to it, and he's very skilled at carving and at all kinds of fine details that, for me, I'm amazed by because that's something I don't have access to. The particular work that he's doing for this commission, it's nice for me to see because it's kind of a return to something I haven't seen him do in a while, and I think it's really beautiful.
We think of ourselves as independent artists working out of the same space. So the studio itself actually doesn't even have a name on the front of the shop. This is basically where we work, but we each kind of do our own thing.
It's really nice to have a cooperative environment. We're sharing a space, but we're all individually our own businesses. But we help each other when we need to, and it's also nice when you're working long hours to have other people around.
We're actually very different in terms of our working style, although we all work in clay. It's very clear and obvious whose work is whose. But we take advantage of the fact that we all work in the same medium and share equipment to help ease the cost of having a studio in the city. This award was actually the first that I carved. So it's kind of as much it's the first, it's also the prototype for the whole series. But pretty much it's a simple carving, predominantly a field of oak leaves. And they're overlapping and interwoven to some degree, but the main idea was just to kind of keep it loose and slightly or more or less an organic form as opposed to a more rigid stylized carving. This specific piece is going to have a simple treatment in the sense it's all going to be one color. So I'll be using the celadon glaze on this piece. First, what I'll do after I've mixed it well is pour it into the piece, dump it out. So I'll make sure that the entire interior of the piece has glaze. Then I'm going to flip it over and just dip it straight into the bucket for the remainder. So what's going to happen though is because there are areas of interest on the piece, as in like recesses and raised portions from the carving, the glaze will pool in different points and break on different surfaces. So you'll still get surface variation based on the thickness of the glaze in different areas. Volunteerism is an essential aspect, I think, of any community. We may not always give it a name, but it exists in so many different forms, whether it's just the simple act of helping somebody out from time to time. It could be your neighbor, it could be a complete stranger on the street, to actually actively signing up for a program. Presently, I have a volunteer helping me in class, and she's a great assistant. She helps in terms of keeping the workflow going. I can focus on what I'm doing and know that I have somebody there to support me and lend aid when I need it. So likewise, any volunteer who steps up in any capacity is basically saying, I believe in this community. I want to do my part to keep it vibrant. So volunteerism is without a doubt one of the most important aspects of I guess community living and giving back to your community. Yeah. The idea is I want to have two colors on this piece. So basically at this point what I have to do is create a mask or a barrier, and that's using liquid wax to preserve this color and be able to then dip the rest of the piece into another color without having the two colors blend. So I've got to apply again a layer of wax as a barrier. Taking some of these pieces out. I'm happy with it. It's got all the things that it's supposed to have. The carving is well accentuated by the glaze instead of being masked by it, which could have happened. The wax, if you remember seeing the wax earlier, did a good job of making sure there wasn't too much bleeding on the edges, and where it is, I think it's actually added a nice effect. It's just kind of melted in nicely without creating any bare patches or anything like that. So I'm actually really happy with this piece. Glazes. This is the celadon glaze. Also looks good. Color's nice. Carving is appropriately visible without being masked by anything. This one was meant as the group award. Which is why there's basically three main sections. The idea behind these were stylized acorn shapes or upside down acorn shapes. Because in my mind, the acorns although they're not organized for compass points, the idea was there's 4 kind of points to all directions in the sense of, it's kind of heritage is sort of where we're coming from. That's the last one. I do believe in, the quality of the handmade, obviously. And for me, it was very important that each of these pieces be made by myself and hand carved, as opposed to, maybe there are other options to create relief textures. I've been working, making items out of clay for a fair amount of time now, and I hopefully have improved over that amount of time. I'm quite satisfied with these awards. I think hopefully they do the categories justice, and the recipients are happy to receive these.
Volunteers are basically selfless. It's selfless service. It's really giving to others. I know for sure that they're not in doing their volunteer work expecting to be recognized and to be thanked. But it really is, from my perspective, an enormous honor to be able to make this year the awards that will actually recognize them and thank them for the work that they do. Volunteers are the creatures that operate maybe between earth and sky and that keep a community together. The Community Spirit Award for this year is a functional box. That was the request from the committee. I had proposed something that would go on the wall, but it has actually the box itself has a lot of the elements that I had of my initial proposal. My initial proposal did include this waterfront line delineating the difference between the sky and the earth. So that has been retained in the box. The process of making the boxes has included working with 2 different clay bodies. One that's very groggy, a bit like having sand in it, so it's very textured, and the other one is a porcelain for the temperature that I'm firing to. So the interesting part about these 2 clay bodies is that they're really quite different. One is very smooth, and the other one is this, as I say, more textured, has more almost like sand in it. If you were to feel it with your fingers, you feel more of it's just different to tactile. But these 2 different clays dry differently, and they want to almost go in opposite directions. So it's kind of interesting to work with them in a way that puts them together to come to the awards, which are the boxes.
Vanessa has come a long way in terms of solving a lot of technical problems this year, and it's because she's really set for herself some technical challenges, working with different types of clays and trying to combine them together in a single piece, a single object. As a ceramic artist, that sort of sets you up for trouble. And Vanessa went in knowing that, and she's been strategic in finding ways to sort of respond to those challenges. And it's really boosted her technical skills for sure.
This is why my little note here on that, it's like, yes.
You're going to get different sorts of responses by working with a hollow, right, where the glaze is going to collect and flow.
Oh, then when it's going to
And that's
drip.
not really representational of the kinds of forms that you're making, where it's going to be, there are little grooves, small areas where it's going to be gathering together, but generally speaking, it's going to flow over.
And then this, all I do is, it's not an elegant process. There. So, see it there? It's come out. It's maybe even a bit distorted. And then, take this magic tool, which I do not know if it has a name, and hope for the best. So, highly unsophisticated. I'm cutting through this box. So now I have 2 pieces, one that's sort of showing the irregularities and the very hopefully straight cut lid. Once those are put aside, then I return to the same mold, and using the grogged clay now with the globs, I use globs, I press them into the mold. And at a certain point, I then take one of the halves of the porcelainous piece, flip it over into the mold. And so what I'm visually looking at that point is I'll have some porcelainous clay, some space, and almost the grog clay below. And then I'll take more of the grog clay, fill it all in. And what I'm doing there is joining both the porcelainous and the grogged clay. And at that point, I'm really compressing the clay and forming the shape that's going to be in the inside. And that process takes a fair amount of time. And then when that piece, when the mold has absorbed some of the moisture from the actual clay, I flip that out, and then I put together overnight what is now the base of the clay, the base of the box, and the lid. I put them together without the lip, and I actually dry them inverted with a lot of plastic to keep the moisture in. So it's actually not drying, it's just settling, which is sort of an important part of this process. I let that happen overnight, and then the next day I will put the lip into the box, the rim.
It's beautiful. I like the way it's so soft by comparison. It's not a scratch. I know. Nurul's got extremely high standards.
The program at Sheridan is really intense. It takes over your life in ways that you couldn't possibly predict. And the more you learn about it, the more you want to know. And the more you experiment and learn about the materials, you realize that it never ends and that there's always something new and exciting to do with ceramics. And I think that's what's amazing about Sheridan, is that it's a really transformative 3 years.
In order to create the lip of the box, I will first either roll out a slab, a bit like you do with pastry, or I will pass it through our slab roller. Either way, I've got something that looks very much like pastry, and then I cut strips to the size that I want. So I'm able to cut it and create the lip. Then I cut that lip at an angle, and I soften it and I clean it up.
So what is lovely about this porcelain is that I can actually use the sponge fairly liberally on it. I can smoothen out the lines where I want them.
The last detail that I put on a box is, of course, the writing. So I've chosen to write in script on the boxes. And there is an exhibition of the graduating class of all studios. So it includes textiles, glass, furniture, and ceramics, of course. So that was very exciting. It was it was very successful in the sense that we had people coming in there till about 10 o'clock at night. So there were people on the sidewalk, the galleries were full, the work was great. So a great opportunity as a student to start, exhibiting our work and showing our work. And that process is also very interesting because once your work becomes public, there's a whole new dialogue that starts happening.
So, I think that dialogue of privacy is a real important part of what she's been doing with her thesis work. And that's why I think, in a lot of ways, the fact that she's taken those pieces and been inspired to work more publicly in relation to this commission makes those pieces really interesting.
Once it goes through the bisque firing, then I glaze them. And that's a bit of a slow process. Oakville is my home. I haven't often worked in Oakville, but I have always lived almost in Oakville since my family and I arrived in Canada. We came from Argentina in 1985. This area is, to the family, very important. The pieces are glazed inside and outside, and there is different glazes for different reasons. As I glaze the inside, both the lid and the box, with a clear glaze. This cleaning off can actually be done at different times. The glaze will come out. Once that is done, then I will glaze the lid and the part of the box that is, whether referring to the lake or the sky
with the glaze. And then once that is on, we put the pieces in the kiln for the glaze firing, which is about 16 hours of firing, and then another 16 to 20 of just cooling down before the pieces can be taken out. It says 60 degrees, clear to open. And I can use my hands because it's not so hot. Yes, it works. Mostly important that it works for the recipient. But yes, I think we have, we've got texture, we've got lines, we've got, the handwritten note, as I try to think of script. I know it's not what we use the most, being so accustomed to text messages, but, handwriting does have a connotation of something personal, and, these recipients are receiving and are being acknowledged on a very personal activity. So I kind of like that idea. I debated what type of script to put, and then I thought, okay, just handwriting works. So that's what it is.
Yeah, I forgot.
Try to live through
Cool?
Yep. Okay. Yep.
I'm currently in my first of 3 years at Sheridan, so it's kind of fun to be at that point because you have all great ideas and you're not limited by actual technology. Sheridan College, in the glass department here, they ran a bit of a competition amongst the students. I submitted my design, and then it got sent off. One of the things that I did before I submitted my design to the town was I had a talk with the actual professors to make sure that it was doable. It'll look not unlike this. The central piece will actually have a wave in it. It's got this oak-leaf shape to it. When you look down on it, it'll have a nameplate on there, and then when it comes out of the mold, it looks not unlike this. It'll be on the end of the pipe, and we just break it off, and we put that in to cool. And then when it's done, we saw it off right about here, and polish the bottom. So of course this one's been sawn already. The process of the thing kind of goes like we start out with a spike of glass. We form we take a gather and we form it into kind of a conical piece of glass. And then we get a couple of what we call gathers. We gather glass on the end of a rod, and then we roll it in colored powder, which is basically really finely crushed glass with color in it. Then we melt that in. We roll it a few times just to make sure that it's got lots of solid color on it. What we do is we take molten glass out of the furnace and we roll it in this colored powder, the glass color, and it sticks. It'll stick to the glass, the hot glass. And then what we do is we take it over to the glory hole and we melt it in. So the glory hole gets it nice and hot, reheats the glass. Once it's melted in nice and neat, I'll take it over to Paul there and he'll stick it on a piece. But I want to get it pretty hot so that I don't have I get a nice small trail for him. And then we apply that onto our spike, right? So we have two colors. We have two guys doing it basically. We'll lay on one color and then we'll flip it over and we'll lay on the other color. So we have basically 3 rods of color together, right? Because we don't want the glass to cool off too much after he's done it, after he's formed his spiky bit there. We don't want the glass to cool off too much, and we don't want to have to reheat it over and over and over again. So it takes 2 of us with bit rods to form 2 colors, just so that we can put the one color on and then put the next color on, and then go and melt them together. Because if we put one color on and then he melts it together, then we put another color on and he melts that in, it could melt in kind of a weird blurred shape. So if we put them both on at the same time, then they melt at the same rate, and that makes it much more crisp and nicer.
And so now we laid the color on the center bit, and we just have to melt the color in so it becomes one smooth pattern. Because if there's any seams or anything where the color is, when we plunge it into the middle, it's going to catch bubbles there. So that'll be little imperfections in the design.
Then we'll melt them together so that they're smooth without a lot of edges, because if we have a lot of edges, we'll trap air, and we didn't want a ton of extra bubbles or special design of bubbles, so we wanted to make sure that it's all nice and smooth. Then what we do is we extrude it out a bit lengthwise and give it a twist, a nice slow twist, and that gives it kind of that helix of color. In this you can see the spike of color, but it has this nice, about 2 revolutions worth of color, and 2 revolutions of twist in color. Then we put a bit of a wave into it, so it looks kind of more like a flame. They're dirt from gravity, so this puts a nice bend in it. Then we have a graphite mold that's made out of a big block of graphite. It's a 2-part mold, so it splits in half basically. I'll get a ladle of glass out of the furnace, a big ladle of glass, and we pour that into the mold so it's full. And then the guy who formed the spike with a twist in it plunges that into the mold. So we plunge it straight down into the mold. We let it cool off a little bit so that it firms up, because glass is kind of like taffy, after a few minutes. We wait a little bit longer and it seizes up a little bit more. It's still flexible but not solid.
Just doing this to cool the edges here, set it up a bit.
Then we pull it out of the mold and we flash it in the glory hole, and that's to even out the heat. But also the flame in the glory hole will polish the one end. So this end here gets its smooth surface from what we call flame polishing.
And so we have to let it completely set up before we put it away. Otherwise, if we put it away too hot, it's gonna deform when it's in the annealer. The internal heat in it will actually deform the piece.
Yeah, the heat actually moves kind of slow, and the internal heat will come out to the external part of the piece, and then when it sits on the grating in the annealer, because the shelves are great, it can actually take on the shape of the grating if it was too, if it becomes too hot. Now the annealer itself isn't that hot, even though it feels like it. When you stick your head in there, it feels like it. It's not hot enough to actually deform, but the interior of the piece could be 300, 400, 500 degrees warmer than the actual exterior, and then that soaks out to the outside.
Yeah, the annealers are at 500 degrees, and these furnaces are at 2,000.
Yeah. Then we wait for a while until it seizes up. As soon as it stops moving, then we'll break it off and we'll put it in the annealing oven.
Now we're just creating a stress point in the glass. This is a really cool part now, so if I hit the glass, all the vibrations are gonna stop at that one point.
Then it'll sit in the annealing oven for about 57 hours. And that cools down slowly, and what it does is it takes all the stress out of the glass. Because all the forming that we do causes inconsistent heating throughout the glass, right? And even though we're flashing it and doing all kinds of things to it to try and even out the heat, it'll still have inconsistent heat through it. So what we do is we put it in the annealing oven, and it bathes it in a 550 degrees Celsius for a good 25 hours or so. Well, everything in a glass shop is a team effort, right? I came up with the design. You know, it's my design, but that doesn't mean that I'm the one who carries things out. I mean, there are a number of artists like that. They actually just design it, and somebody else actually makes the thing. In this case, I've got the skill set that allows me to help out, right? And then plus I get to supervise. I get to look and see what's going on. Some other first-year students that are there are Paul Vandenbiggert. He's the one who's putting the twist in the glass. He's quite good at it, so we figured why reinvent the wheel for one of us to figure that out. And then there's Matt Crosby, and Matt's helping out with everything else, bringing bids, opening the door. You need to have the hand in the glass shop because there's so many things that are really hot that you just can't do it. You just can't hold a pipe in one hand and try and open the door with the other hand. Especially with this thing, it weighs too much. It's a good 5-10 pounds of glass on there. It's important that I get Paul and Matt to help out. Each one will be unique. It'll be at least slightly different. No matter how much we wanted them to be exactly the same, they'll always be a little bit different just because of how we did it. The shape of this award, it takes on the shape which is actually an oak leaf. So if you look at it, it's oak leaf shaped, right? And that's of course Oakville's own built-in iconography. So what we did is we placed these spirals of color in the center to kind of symbolize an inner flame. So it's kind of like the inner fire that runs the town. So the volunteers have, are this energy that runs the town, and you don't get anything done without having a good core of volunteers willing to do the things that need to be done. So I thought it was important to have that in there, and it also kind of symbolizes the inner fire of the actual people who are volunteers, because they have to have a certain dedication that you don't see. So it's kind of a dual meaning in that regard. You've got the inner fire of the town and the inner fire in the people who are the inner fire of the town. The complexity of the piece actually requires that you have a few extra hands, especially when we've got a two-part mold. One guy plunges the piece into the mold, but he can't let go of the pipe to try and extract it. So it takes another two people to try and separate the mold off of it, because it can stick. Glass can get sticky at that temperature, and it can get stuck in the mold. And if we leave it in there too long, it's just going to crack. So we'll have a ruined piece at that point. So because graphite really sucks the heat out of the glass, right? It's like doing anything with it, touching metal to the glass, it'll suck the heat out of the glass. So it takes a couple of guys in there, sometimes prying, sometimes physically holding on to the mold with a pair of gloves on, and then Paul can pull it up out of there once it's out, once it's been freed. It's important to pull up vertically so that we don't snap off some of the vertical striations in the mold, like these bits in here. That's solid graphite in the mold, and if we twist it, we can snap them off, and then we've ruined the mold, and we don't want to do that, right? It takes a while to cut one of those things because it's 6 inches thick. So it takes a few hands to get things done. This is actually my first time in Oakville. It's a very nice town. Everybody's really nice here, and it's almost surprising, like how nice everyone is in Oakville, and also how dedicated volunteers are, and how important it is to actually give them some kind of award to recognize what they do. So it was great for me to sit down and go, hey, I get to make this thing.
Together, my wife and I were, I guess, were designers, I guess. Myself, I'm a shop guy. I like making stuff. I like getting into the studio early and taking care of business. Trying to figure out how to make something and what the best way to make something will be. And it is
Yeah, that'll be nice.
so it'll be in about there.
Perfect.
Like
And you get
right
to
there.
keep some of this stuff.
Yeah, that's a neat.
I like that.
That's a neat thing. I wonder how it'll stay with. Should finish up okay.
Yeah.
I actually first met both Joseph and Dana about 4 years ago as students at the Sheridan College Craft and Design program, and both were studying in the furniture studio. Right from the start, both Joseph and Dana have been very active in the field of woodworking, and it's also been my pleasure to see them move from students into building a collaborative design studio and production house called DJ and JB, and which also kind of playfully references their own relationship as husband and wife.
Dana and I work very closely together. What do you think? We always bounce our ideas off each other. We work as a team. I think in coming up with how these awards have turned out, Dana's been just pushing me always to do more and to just dig in to the project. Basically for me to explore and dive into the making of these awards. A lot of it is on me as the guy who's in front of the lathe or doing most of the actual work and shaping of these things, to actually treat each piece with its own intention. And then she kind of swoops in and adds whole other layers of meaning. She sees things that maybe I haven't seen, and adds context and support. So it'll be in about there.
So as a collaborative team, they have developed to produce a really flexible and modern selection of work, and they always focus on using local materials, sustainable practices.
So Dana and I started JB plus DG while we were in school together. The acronym is our initials, Joseph Bowman plus Dana Gedney.
We're at Blossom and Bloom at Union Station in Toronto. It's a 2-day craft fair. We do one of these every 2 to 3 weeks throughout the summer. Depending on our booth size, we bring what we can, and because it is a flower show, we brought our planters and some of the paper flowers I've started making, and some wall hangings and mobiles.
So when it came time to establish a name for a business, that just seemed like apt. It's who we are, it's a bit of a love story, and it's simple. So our own approach is the simplest expression of an elegant idea. Well, I'm the studio technician at the Wood Studio at Queen Elizabeth Park Community and Cultural Center. And I get to talk shop with residents every day I'm here and help out with projects and just hang out in the wood studio all day with people. I think specifically this community center is amazing. This is a space that when it opened, I remember being intensely jealous of the first technician who scored the gig that I have now. Very intensely jealous. For me, it's kind of a coveted gig. I like the role. You get to meet a lot of people. You get to help out with a lot of projects. I get to do a lot of thinking about how I might solve a problem without actually having to solve that problem myself. I get to offer my advice and then see how that project plays out. So it's fun, it's rewarding, and it opened up a lot of opportunities. The fun part's over, and now the work begins.
What I know about Joseph and Dina's studio practice is that they've put a lot of hard work into building something that works both in terms of what they want to do creatively and what their customers are looking for. And so they have a really beautiful range of products that are very modern and aesthetic, but that are also very customizable, and that they're using local woods and sustainable practices.
I try not to be too precious about any of the material. I believe that the material is
All right,
Are we back?
I think we're back. I call us back.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Council has met in a session closed to the public for the purpose of dealing with a matter pertaining to litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality, and receiving advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. With respect to item C1, which is an LPAT appeal concerning 3171 Lakeshore. The council has issued instructions by the way of a staff direction, and we are now resuming our public meeting, and we have now finished all of the business of the public business on the agenda, and we now need a motion to rise and report to council. Councillor Knoll, thank you for that. Any objection to rising and reporting to council? Madam Clerk, there is no objection. That motion carries. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 1 and 2, public hearing items 3 and 4, discussion item 5, confidential discussion item C1, and advisory committee minutes item 6, as noted by the clerk. Is there a mover and seconder for the report? Councillor Lischina, Councillor Grant, thank you. Any objection to the report? Madam Clerk, there is no objection to the report. The report is adopted. Council, is there any new business of an emergency, congratulatory, or condolence nature? Thank you, Council. Is there a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws? Councillor Longo and Councillor Elger. Thank you. Any objection to the bylaws as listed in the agenda? Madam Clerk, there is no objection. The bylaws are adopted. Council, thank you very much for your time and attention. You've made great contributions to all of these decisions, and it's been terrific working with you. With that, we are adjourned.